Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tasty History Tidbits. I'm your host, Professor A, and it is my favorite time of year. It is gumbo season. I love gumbo. I absolutely love it. So today we're going to go through making a gumbo, and it's based off of a recipe from my great-grandmother, who's from Louisiana. And then we're also going to talk about Storyville, which was the red light district in New Orleans, and it existed for a very short period of time, but it had such a great impact on the city. Stay tuned.
So before we get to our ingredients list, there's a couple of pieces of equipment that you're going to need specifically for gumbo. The first one is a big gumbo pot because usually it's made in larger batches because you can freeze it later or you're serving a lot of people. Today I'm going to be using this pot, which is when I'm making gumbo, it's my gumbo pot. When I'm making tamales, it's my tamale pot. It is a 20.8 liter or 22 quart stock pot. You can also use something like this or something smaller like this. I don't recommend using a ceramic coated pot because when you make the roux, you're actually making it on very, very high heat. And so that can actually mess with your ceramic coating. Also, wooden spoons. This is the one thing that you would think doesn't matter, but it actually matters a lot. Why a wooden spoon? Well, when you're making a roux, you're actually making 1 part flour to 1 part oil over high heat. You cannot walk away from your roux at any time, so you're constantly stirring while you're making that roux until it's like a nice chocolate color, right? But because it's such high heat on oil, plastic is likely to melt, so don't use that. Silicone sometimes melts as well, and if you're using metal, it's going to heat up all the way up to where you're holding it, and that's not comfortable to hold. So go with the old tried and true method. Use a wooden spoon. Many people use this, and I highly recommend it. Beyond that, you're probably also going to need a skillet because you're going to be browning your sausage, and those are the main pieces of equipment for it. Don't worry, it looks intimidating, but gumbo is actually one of those recipes that's super, super easy. I will say, though, that if you walk away from your roux at any time before you've put in things to cool it down, you will burn your roux and you will have to start over because your whole gumbo will taste like burnt roux. So the real key to good gumbo is the roux, and I will do a separate video showing you how to make a roux because you'll also find that roux are standard in other types of Louisiana, New Orleans type food, which includes like etouffees and jambalaya. So now let's move on to the ingredients. All gumbos have the same basic ingredients, even though you'll see variations depending on whose family the recipe comes from or what region of Louisiana they come from. Today, like I said, I'm making one based off of my great-grandmother's recipe. So hers may be different than something that you're used to eating, but ours is actually going to include seafood. My family doesn't like it when I make too much of a seafood stock for it, so we're going to be using chicken broth instead of seafood broth or seafood stock, but there will be seafood in the dish. It looks like a lot of ingredients, but I promise you it is not going to be too much. So first off, you have to do the Trinity. The Trinity in Louisiana Creole cooking is bell peppers, onions, and celery. These are what's going to cool down your roux when you're getting ready to add other ingredients. So as soon as your roux is the right color, you're going to add chopped onions, chopped celery, chopped bell peppers to it, and that's going to cool down and bring the temperature of your roux down. So for mine, because I'm making a large batch, because it's my grandfather's favorite dish as well, and I'm sending some home with him and my grandmother, I have 2 bunches of celery, about 2 small to medium onions chopped up, a clove of garlic, and I have 3 bell peppers here. I would have preferred to use green bell peppers, but my store did not have any in stock today, so we're using red bell peppers or red orange bell peppers. Now, in terms of the meat, we have shrimp, and because the price of crab is so expensive, we're going to be using some crab meat, and this is found in the refrigerator aisle, usually next to your seafood department. This one is the claw meat, and this one is the lump meat. We have some chicken. This is about 2 pounds of chicken. And because we like it when there's actual like crab claws and stuff in it, I have some rock crab claws. You can use king crab, you can use snow crab if you want to. I do have some snow crab legs. And some very fresh chicken sausage. Andouille sausage is andouille sausage is usually made with pork, but we're using chicken today. And this one, you're going to have to brown because it is raw, but if you use andouille sausage, we recommend browning it just to bring the flavors out. In terms of seasoning, it's not a whole lot of seasoning for this because you want your ingredients to be the star, so I use a Creole seasoning from Tony Chachere's. You can also use Sloppy Mama if you have it. I don't recommend Lori's because it doesn't have enough of that kick to it. And then also, you can put okra in the gumbo to thicken it. I do not put okra in my gumbo because I don't like okra. So to get it to that right consistency, when it's done cooking, we'll use some of this gumbo filet. You can find this in your seasoning aisle. So let's get started on chopping up our vegetables, and we'll make our roux, and I'll show you how to put it all together. All right, so remember how I said you can't walk away from the roux? This is why you don't start the roux first. They always say first thing you do is start the roux, but you're actually going to want your vegetables to cool down the temperature of your roux when it's ready. So right now I'm just cutting up my bell peppers. And you don't want them too big. You want them kind of diced. My onions are already cut because I bought pre-cut onions because that's just convenient. But in this case, I have to dice up my bell peppers. So that is what we're going to do now. And then you're also going to do the same thing with your celery. And then once you're done dicing up all your bell peppers, which I just put mine in the same bowl as the onion, and I need another bowl for my celery, you're just going to cut up your celery. You don't want it to be huge chunks. You just want it to be nice little chunks. But you don't have to worry about having these like super finely diced or anything. All right, so now that we've got our celery all nice and diced up and we've got our vegetables ready to go, I am just going to pour some boiling hot water over our cloves of garlic. This will make it actually easier to peel. So we're going to let these soak, and while they're soaking in this boiling hot water, I'm going to go ahead and make the roux. Okay, so now that our roux is ready, we're going to cool it down by adding our celery and our bell peppers and onion. And then we're just going to give it a good stir so it gets some of that flavor in there. And once you see that it's fully coated, you're going to notice that it's cooled down quite significantly. So we are using chicken stock, but because this is such a big batch, I'm also using water and chicken bouillon. So I'm just going to add some water to it right now to keep it cooled down. And then I'm going to give my bouillon cubes a chance to work. And now we're going to let it all get back up to temperature before we add the rest of our ingredients. Okay, now we're going to season up our chicken. And then we're just going to add it to our batch. Let me make sure it's all coated. And now we're just going to add our chicken. You don't have to brown the chicken because you want the chicken to fall apart. So that way you just kind of get shreds of chicken when you're eating it. So while that is getting up to temperature and coming to a boil with the chicken in it and chicken stock and all our vegetables, I'm just peeling the garlic. Now, as you can see, because we had soaked our garlic in hot water, it just peels so much easier. And it's not like all over the place crumbly. It's just peeling like butter. It's super smooth. And one of the reasons I really like making gumbo, which is, you know, probably reasons that a lot of people like making gumbo, is because it connects me to family. My great-grandmother I was very fortunate enough to have both of my great-grandmothers alive when I was younger. And so I got to taste a lot of their cooking, and making this gumbo kind of just ties me to that family history because I remember eating gumbo and just thinking about how warm and cozy it is, and having those those feelings of home, because like my great grandma would make a big pot of gumbo and invite like the whole family over, so all my cousins, aunties, and uncles would be there, and we'd be eating gumbo and cornbread, and there'd be other things, but that was mainly why we were getting together. And it was just one of those small things that you did to keep family together. So for me, gumbo is as much of the fact that it's like literally one of my favorite foods on the planet as it is a sense of family and a sense of connection to family, which is why when you make gumbo and when you go out and look for gumbo recipes, you'll see that they have the same staple ingredients, but for the most part, they're a little different just depending on whose family they came from, because it is a connection in a sense of the past. And it is a connection to people who are no longer with us. And it's just one of those nice things that you can just pass on to your kids, your grandkids, and just keep that family tradition alive and keep that ancestor or family member alive. And for me, the biggest compliment was after I'd made a few batches of gumbo, when my grandfather says, "This tastes just like my mom's." And that to me was huge because I knew I had made it correctly. And it was probably correct the other ways, but it just didn't taste like hers. And once he gave me that sign off, that meant the gumbo was perfect and I am following in the tradition of my family members. So next we're gonna actually just kind of make these pieces of garlic a little bit smaller. My grandmother does not eat large pieces of garlic, so I'm just cutting them smaller. And then we'll put them in the pot. And once they're in the pot, we'll work on browning our chicken sausage. So as you can see, these are fresh sausage still in the casings. So before we can do anything, cut them down or anything, I have to cook them a little bit. Because these are made the old school way. So this is actually in intestine casing. And so once they're browned up enough, then we can start cutting them up and then really brown like the insides to bring those flavors out. But I can't do that until they're somewhat cooked. But if you buy andouille sausage, you don't have to do this part. You can just brown it and then stick it in your pot. Gumbo can take a long time or it can take a very short time. It takes about an hour and 45 minutes on average. My great grandmother used to simmer hers all day and then add her fish last. And it just gave it, I don't know, just a really rich flavor, because once you got all those ingredients in there and you mixed them, it felt like simmering them all day low and slow just made it like this. It was like chef's kiss. I don't know. So I happen to like simmering mine all day for hours. But you don't have to simmer yours as long. Now while I'm waiting on that, I'm actually going to prepare my shrimp. You can buy shrimp that's already been deshelled and deveined. I just happen to have these in my freezer already. These are some white tiger shrimp. And so I'm going to shell them and get them ready, as well as cut into my crab to make it easier for someone to crack open. And because life is too short to be chopping everything, I'm using kitchen scissors to cut these open so I can continue cooking them more on the inside. A good pair of kitchen shears or kitchen scissors will really be a lifesaver for most of us. It's a huge time saver. And once those are all cut up, you're just going to let them cook here and brown up some more. I turned the heat down while I was browning, but I'm going to turn it up to medium heat and just let it brown some more. And then once it's properly browned, we're going to add it to our gumbo. Now we're just adding our sausage. And while that's cooking, we're going to go ahead and prepare our seafood. Okay, and so to prepare our seafood, we're going to leave a couple of crab legs in there. Usually I like to use king crab, but that wasn't available today, so I'm using some snow crab and some rock crab. And to prepare them, to make them easy to open up, you just take our crab scissors and you just cut a line through them. And that just makes it easier for people to open. And then for like the tops of them, where there's just a little bit of meat, because these are snow crabs, they don't have a ton of meat, I just like to dig those out and then put them in the bowl, because they'll just be mixed with the rest of my lump crab meat and my claw meat. Okay, so now we're going to add our shrimp to the match, and we're also going to add some bay leaves. And I'm just adding like a handful of bay leaves in there. And then, because I make this like my great grandma, I am going to let this simmer for a while on low heat. And probably about 5 minutes before we get ready to serve, we'll add the crab meat, because the crab is already cooked. We just want to basically warm it and incorporate the flavor. And while this is simmering, let's get to the history.
In AMC's Interview with the Vampire, we meet Louis Delac, who owns a brothel in the infamous 16-block area of New Orleans called the Red Light District, just off the French Quarter along Basin Street. This district ran from 1897 until 1917 and was the brainchild of Sidney Story, who sought to contain vice to one area of New Orleans instead of having it spread all throughout the city. Along Storyville, you had various cheap brothels and crypts or pads, saloons, and more expensive dance halls. And some of these places played host to jazz musicians of the time, including Jelly Roll Morton. Storyville gained a reputation for being Sin City before there ever was a Sin City, because for a price you could find any kind of girl you wanted. You had very famous houses such as Lulu White's Mahogany Hall, which catered to upper class, dignified white men by having mixed race or mulatto prostitutes, and did not serve African American men. For the next 20 years, Storyville thrived, and it wasn't until the military put a base just a few miles away that it was shut down, as the federal government started cracking down on federal vice districts. After that, most of the buildings were demolished eventually, with only a few still existing. And as of 2005, Katrina did destroy what was left of that vice district.
Okay, and now we're just going to add our crab. And this is this is actually probably about 20 minutes before I'm going to be done with it. So I realized I wanted to give it a longer time because I am cooking in a large batch. So we're just going to stir that in. And then let it simmer some more. Right before we get ready to serve, we'll add the gumbo filet to it, and the filet will thicken it. You don't want to add cornstarch or flour or anything like that to thicken it. You want to use a gumbo filet. Alternatively, if you like okra, okra will naturally thicken it. So it's day 2. I made the gumbo last night, and today we're having Sunday dinner with my grandparents, my mom and my brother, and of course my hubby and son. So I'm very, very excited for that. And what I did to make sure that it was ready for today is that I just left it in the pot overnight in my fridge, and then I reheated it on my stove on low heat, and it's been on there for about an hour, so it's not cooking, it's just reheating the batch. And we made some rice, and the husband made cornbread, which is great. But this is what the finished product looks like. Doesn't that look delicious? It's so full of yummy goodness. And if you want your gumbo a little thicker, you can add more gumbo filet at the end of it, or you can add okra. I did add a little bit of gumbo filet just to thicken it up a little bit. Some people like it more like a stew. Some people like it more like a soup. My grandparents happen to like it when it's between a stew and a soup, so that's why mine looks like this. So let's give it a taste. I'm already well aware that this is going to be something I love because it's literally my favorite dish. And to quote a popular saying from my mom, I put my foot in this, meaning that it is delicious. It is so good. And I'm going to have to like stop eating before everybody gets here. Otherwise, I'm going to be too full to eat with my family. But it's so good. So I hope that you'll give this recipe a try. And don't be afraid to experiment and make the gumbo really your own. So also, pro tip, you can add a little bit of Worcestershire sauce to it to add a little bit of complexity, or you can leave that out completely. But like I said, don't be afraid to experiment and make the gumbo your own. It is really one of those quintessential American dishes. It is comfort food. It is cozy. It is perfect for the cold winter months because it's just going to warm you through, and it's a great way to showcase seafood. If you hate seafood, you can make it with just chicken and sausage. It's up to you really how you want to make it. But if you do decide to make it, go ahead and tag me on Instagram at @tastyhistoryytidbits and leave a comment below and let me know how you like it. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.